So what is a carbon footprint? You hear it all the time now. Essentially, a carbon footprint is a measurement of how much carbon dioxide you cause to be put into the atmosphere through your choices. So how we usually measure that is in what we call CO2 equivalent, or the amount of carbon dioxide, which is CO2, that goes into the air. A way to visualize 1 ton of carbon dioxide is with this reference photo here showing how much larger it is than a bus or a human. So on this scale that we'll be looking at to measure your carbon footprint, each one of these represents this size of sphere. Now, why is this important? Well, carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. So every time we put that into the atmosphere, we are causing the world to warm a little bit more. So it is part of our responsibility as responsible citizens to know our carbon footprint and take steps to reduce it. So how do we do that? Well, let's start by analyzing our flying behavior. So what's going to happen here is we're going to show you 3 different options of how your flying behavior may be. And then you're going to choose the one that best matches you. There won't be a perfect one. And then we're going to measure and see how much each one actually contributes. You're going to want to keep a running total of all of this throughout your choices. So you may fly a few times in Southeast Asia. You may have a few flights within Southeast Asia and 1 long-distance flight per year. Or you have a few flights within Southeast Asia and a couple long-distance flights per year. So just choose one that best matches your flying behavior. If it's the first one, I want you to add 1 ton of carbon dioxide to your carbon footprint. If it's this second one, I want you to add about 2.5 times, or 2.5 tons of carbon dioxide. And if it's the third one, then I want you to add 5 tons of carbon. So keep track of that. That's your flying behavior. Now let's take a look at how you eat. Now when we look at this, we usually talk about meat because meat is not really all that carbon neutral due to the fact that it releases a lot of methane, which is another greenhouse gas, and that's why we call this CO2 equivalent, because some greenhouse gases aren't carbon dioxide, and that's most shown in meat. So if you eat all types of meat, you eat white meat only, you're vegetarian, or you're vegan, let's measure each one. Well, if you're vegan, you'll have the smallest carbon footprint, so that'll be about 1 ton of carbon dioxide. So you want to add that to your previous one from the flight. So it's going to become an added running total, but I can only show you one at a time, so you have to keep track. If you're vegetarian, I want you to add to your previous flying about 1.75 tons. If you eat white meat, I want you to add 2 tons. If you eat all types of meat, then I want you to add 2.5 tons. So keep that number going. Now let's analyze how you get around. So for your transit, you drive or you use public transit. If you use public transit, I want you to add 0.5 tons. If you drive, then I want you to add 3.75 tons. That can include having a taxi drive you around everywhere. Then we want to look at your buying habits, how much you're purchasing. So you could be a minimalist shopper and an avid recycler. You could be an average shopper and concerned about buying local, so that means you try to buy things that are made closer to where you live, and you recycle a little bit, a few things. You could be an average shopper and not concerned about buying local, so you don't really read the labels, and you recycle a bit again, but not everything. You could be an avid shopper and recycle everything you can, so that means you shop a lot, but you are really concerned about recycling. Or you could be somebody who likes to shop, you really like things that are in nice packaging, and you don't really care about what part of the world it came from, and you don't really recycle much at all. So let's measure each one of those. So if you're a minimalist shopper, then you want to add 0.5 tons to the previous meat and flight carbon footprints. If you are an average shopper, then you want to add 1.75 tons if you're concerned about buying local and recycle a bit. If you're an average shopper but you don't really care about buying local and you do recycle a bit, then I want you to add 2.5 tons. And if you're an avid shopper and you recycle everything that you can, well, then you want to add 3.75 tons. For here, if you're one of those really avid shoppers and you like the nice packaging, you're not concerned about where it comes from, you don't really recycle, add about 9 tons to your previous carbon footprints for meat and flights. That takes us to investing. So, if you don't have a bank account, then you don't have to add anything. But most of us do. We use the standard range of investment services. So I want you to add 0.5 tons. Now the reason is, most people don't realize that banks are usually investing your money while it's in your account into unsustainable investments. For example, oil companies. Now for recreation, if you only do carbon neutral activities, in other words, things where you're just like running or doing things with your body like cycling and you're not burning any fossil fuels, you don't have to add anything this time. But if you occasionally go out to bars, movies, and restaurants, you're enjoying sort of the aircon and everything that goes into the products that you're consuming, or you often go out, or you really like carbon intensive activities like motorbikes, motorboating, anything that burns a lot of fuel as you're doing it. So if you are occasionally liking to go out, then I want you to add 1 ton to your carbon footprint. If you are often going out, then add 1.75 tons. And if you like carbon intensive activities, add 2.5 tons. So at this point, if you've added everything up, then you should see a total of your carbon footprints. And so try to find out where that number would be on this axis. So if you added them all together and got 11 tons, just visualize that being here, your personal footprint being here. Now the nice thing to compare that to is, this is the Singapore average, so you can compare yourself. Over here is the world average, so compare yourself to the world. But the amazing thing is that the sustainable average is somewhere around 2 tons. So you might ask yourself and say, okay, well, how can I make a change? Well, the first thing is, of course, you could see the relative sizes of each choice you had before. So trying to choose the lowered, smaller options is one way. But some of you may notice that even if I were to choose the smallest options for each of them, I would still be above the sustainable average. And that's because there's not one solution. It's not just us changing behavior. It's the fact that also we're going to decarbonize our economy. So for example, for vegans, a vegan diet would be virtually carbon neutral. In other words, it would use no carbon or contribute no carbon whatsoever. But the fact right now that our food is transported using fossil fuels is what gives vegans their carbon footprint. So we could actually remove that one by decarbonizing. For the next one, using public transit, if we were to use carbon neutral fuels, again, that could disappear. Or potentially battery powered through solar. If we decarbonized again, the way we actually produce the products, the energy consumed to produce them, wouldn't really exist. And if we are recycling and we're powering our recycling plants with carbon zero or carbon neutral fuels, then we could actually eliminate that one as well. Same thing with flying. We could eliminate that through carbon offsetting, or by burning carbon neutral fuels. And for banking, we could get rid of that by being very responsible investors and actually making sure that we tell our financial advisors we only want our money used for green or sustainable or responsible investments. And most of the time we don't do that right now. But if we start being responsible investors, we can eliminate that. So it's not only a combination of us being more responsible in our choices, but it's also going to be the evolution in technology and the transition to a carbon-free economy that will allow us to have a sustainable carbon footprint that will lead our future generations to be able to enjoy a healthy planet.